All right, welcome, welcome, welcome once again to the new podcast, New Elder Wisdom. We are blessed today to be joined by Tyson Adams, who is a trained IFS therapist. He's also a men's coach, somatic body worker, and psychedelic facilitator. After 20 years addicted to pornography, he outgrew it 10 years ago and has found his passion and purpose in helping other men master their life force energy. He also co-facilitates men's work leadership intensives and works with couples experiencing intimacy challenges. When he's not working, you'll catch him on a rock wall or riding a slack line in sunny San Diego, but not for long, right? We're going to be getting you up here in the Northwest is what I understand.
Yes, I'm excited. So first off, thank you, Hunter, for having me. And yeah, the plan is to move up to Bellingham, Washington at the end of September. So I'll be in the Pacific Northwest and looking forward to doing men's work up there because I've really not been a part of it whatsoever.
Yeah, it's been really nice here to having been on the national and international stage and then to like kind of bring it home and be like, okay, what do we need to do here to have a longer integrated community of men who are going to support each other as we move along. So we're excited to have you and see what stirs up in the wilds when we get together as men. I appreciate you taking your time today. I think I really believe the work you're doing is at the forefront of importance with men, particularly around porn addiction. And we were just dropping in a little bit briefly before here, and I think we agreed that it's a crisis. And so I would love it if you would speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a crisis just by looking at one statistic, which I read recently, which is that most child abuse right now, this is I think a quote I pulled from um, Exodus Cry, but it's child on child. And when they're doing these investigations, both in Australia and the US, and they actually go down that and follow it, what they find is that the older boys that are doing this to the younger kids, both boys and girls, they don't have actual sexual abuse in the home. And so they're learning this stuff on pornography, and then they're going and reenacting that out on the younger children. So this is a very big deal. It's a huge deal.
Wow, that's new information to me. So now we're looking at something that was to the large degree generational, right? Like these patterns would run in family, and now we have the inception of abuse happening through this medium, this pipeline of pornography to the phones and tablets. Wow, that's really intense. Thank you for sharing that. Talk a little bit about your journey. In your introduction, you talk about 20 years. What were those threshold moments of, okay, I've acknowledged, I've addressed. What was it that began to get you over the hump in your own personal journey with porn
Mm-hmm.
addiction?
Yeah. So I used to live in Southeast Asia. I lived in Laos, and I had a coffee roaster and a cafe over there. And we had a cooperative, and then we would put in water wells and do hygiene programs for the kids. And I lived in the jungle. And the story is a little bit of an interesting one, but basically I used a condom. It was a spermicidal lubricant condom. And it set off a series of just painful experiences through my entire pelvic floor, in through my urethra, my penis, like basically my whole root. And I was peeing like 30 times a day. I just couldn't empty my bladder. So in that, what I call a medical emergency, I was forced to stop masturbating. I was forced to not watch pornography because it hurts so bad. So I was going to Western medical doctors. I was going into doctors in Thailand. I even went into India to see if Ayurvedic doctors could work on me, and nothing worked. And so I was in this place of doing an elimination. So I cut out everything, spicy foods and coffee and sugar and soda water. And then I realized, okay, I also need to cut out masturbation. I need to cut out pornography. And in that process of not watching porn for the first time in my life since I was 11 years old, things started to shift. Now, the first thing that I noticed was that I was living my life at a quarter tank. And then all of a sudden now I had a lot more energy to get shit done, to be of service, to put in water wells. And my energy levels started to balance. And I didn't realize that I had normalized living so low on energy all the time, forever. I mean, my whole life I was that way. But the bigger thing that happened was, as I started doing this, I realized that I could look myself in the mirror. And as I could look myself in the mirror without the shame of watching that stuff, and as I started committing to, like, I'm not going to watch it, I just began to shift. I could actually spend time. And I remember I used to smoke a bunch of cannabis and I would stare at the mirror and I was like, who is this guy? And what is this all about? And in that process, I remember this very distinct moment where one day I walked outside and I just felt good. And in that moment, I looked at a little girl who was there, because the Lao children, the parents didn't really look after them. So they would just come into the cafe, and there was boys and girls, and they were just, kind of the sort of the village kids. And I actually made contact with her in a way that I hadn't ever made contact with a child. And then I walked outside and there was an old woman and I made contact with her. And in Lao, it's like sabadi, which is hello. And all of a sudden I got this very clear reality check, which was that my whole life I had been living in this paradigm where I was assessing all women of any age as an actual potential sexual mate, from the youngest of girls to the oldest of grandmothers. And that's what pornography, I realized, was doing to me. It was pornographing and objectifying my entire reality in the way that I was observing. And so instead of seeing the soul, seeing a human being, I was seeing them, through a pornographic lens. And I took a big deep breath and I like let it out. And I was just like, oh my God, I had no idea I was in that cloud. Thank God I'm not in that cloud anymore. And as that started to happen, I realized that little children, women of all ages, dogs, birds, like everybody that I could observe started to feel more safe in my presence, because I wasn't in that place of the predator eye as I was looking out at the world. And that was a big moment. It was a big aha. And I was like, whoa. And that's, for the most part, where a lot of men are operating from as they move out into the world. And that's exhausting. It's an super exhausting way to be in the world, assessing if everybody's, a potential partner. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really see that, how that is like a spiritual birth, like this whole other half of life becomes available to you now, this way of relating and takes us out of the materialism of transaction, right? Because ultimately that's like a type of transactional thinking, to
Mm-hmm.
always be in that pornographic state, as you said. I'm realizing I do want to get back to this, and sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I should ask this, but just to the parents out there, what are the safety mechanisms they can begin to instill? What are the conversations they can have with children, that don't scare them, but also make them aware in a good way, to keep them away from pornography?
Yeah. Well, I think when your children are really young, I think it's super intelligent, and I will definitely be doing this with my boys, but to get a browser blocker on all of their devices. And there are several ones that there's one called Bark, BARK.us. And there's another one, I can't remember the name, but um, these show you where your child is at developmentally. So if they're searching something, it'll send you a text message to show you what they're searching, but then it can also block certain apps and certain types of websites so that they're not exposed to this. So this is a really important thing. There's also ones that have screen time on them as well. So you only have a certain amount of screen time and then it turns off. That's another really important thing. But beyond the actual technology, I would say that this conversation starts when we're young, and it might go something like, hey, bud, I just want to let you know that there are things on the internet that are designed for adults, and they're not appropriate for kids. And just like when you get to the edge of a street and you look both ways, because if you cross and you don't look both ways, you could get injured because a car could hit you. There are things that actually can injure your brain and they can be really harmful for you. And what these things are usually naked people in, they're naked people, just keep it simple. And so if somebody comes to you and shows you something where there's naked people, you're not in trouble, not at all. But what I need for you to do is I need for you to tell them no, and I need for you to come and find an adult immediately. If I'm there, then come find me. If I'm not there, then find an adult and just let them know what happened. And then as soon as you get back to me, we'll talk about it and we'll figure out what to do and we'll make a plan. So that would be a really good conversation that any parent can have with their child. And then it kind of depends upon how old they are, because it's not a matter of if they're going to see porn, they will see porn, but it's a matter of just elongating the space between when they see it and doing your best to protect their innocence as long as possible.
Absolutely. And, I often with parents say, really no smartphones before 16, which a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people are going to be like, whoa, I got to be able to get in touch with them. It's like, yep, get them a flip phone. Tell them to keep the ringer on. It's, I think it's maybe Norway that just made it so no one under 16 can have a smartphone. And then you have the state stepping in, but to do the parents' job. But yeah, as you said, we need to protect the innocence as humanly possible. And the first big step in that is keeping them away from what we call the electric rock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for that. So, being in the men's spaces, there's this big gap inside of men that I've run into so much, this feeling of emptiness that seems to get filled with all the distractions, including porn. What would you say is the primary driver? What drives men to porn?
I'm going to go nervous system on this as far as how I'm going to answer. Because what I'm really hearing is, what drives us towards porn. And I can certainly go into the relating and the reality that we're living in the 21st century. But what I teach and what I think is a really important thing for men to learn is that we have a 500 million year old limbic system that sits at the center of our brain, and that part of the brain is breathe, eat, don't die, and fuck. Those are basically the parts of this part of the brain. And that part of the brain isn't really wired super emotionally. But then when you look at later down the road, the other part of the brain, right? We have the mammalian part of the brain, which is about 200 million years old. And that part of the brain is belonging, it's tribe, it's emotions, it's in and out groups. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is, it's 40,000 to 100,000 years old. It's hard to know how old that is. And so those three parts of the brain are all kind of at war with each other, the way I look at it. We got survival, we got belonging, and then make meaning out of life. And so I think porn and just our pornographic culture hooks right into that part of the brain and fires us so quickly. And we're not able to make sense of that. Our endocrine system starts to fire, starts to get ramped up. And that old part of the brain thinks that we're making a baby when really we're not. And our prefrontal cortex knows that we're not. But there's sort of a dissonance between our nervous system and our humanness. So the animal and the human, they have different agendas for how we might live our life. And so that's kind of where my mind goes when I think about why we're so drawn to this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I've often directed men who are struggling with porn to create an altar of the feminine in their
Mm.
house, a place to have a picture of their mother, their grandmother, their sisters, a place where they go and connect, and also to utilize that altar as a place of experiencing not to just go there and give thanks, but to also look for where's the conflict in these relationships, like where is there the discord and the dissonance, and can I begin to live in that and be present with that a little bit more, uh, as well as a place to connect to the divine feminine if they wish, if they feel that call. How does that land for you?
Oh, I love that. I think it's super important. And having an altar anywhere in your space. I mean, one of the things that I teach as well is we have profane spaces and sacred spaces. You're speaking to a sacred space, but with a feminine altar, which is beautiful. And men often don't have a place to go and sit when these urges come up. And so if you don't have a place to go and to be with yourself, to sit, to journal, to meditate, to pray, then it's really difficult to overcome these animal urges, which are very quick and very fast. So I love that as an idea. And I haven't necessarily added in the feminine piece, but I would also agree with you that there are challenges that we have with certain, the feminine in our households or in our homes. One of the books that I recommend to men is When He's Married to Mom, and it's a book about mother enmeshment. And a lot of the men that come to me that have porn addictions, when we look at the relationship with mom, we see that there's covert, sexual agendas happening. There's too much closeness. They're having to be, a surrogate for their missing father or their cheating father or their father that's working. And so there's a lot of wounding between mother and son that often leads into some of these pornographic ways of being as well.
Yeah, the Oedipus road, as so to speak, I guess. So, right, you do. I like how you give the men some place to go. It's like, okay, no more porn. What now? And you talk a lot about cultivation and retention of semen. Um, Talk a little bit about that, as you were forced to the forced to the way to
Mm-hmm.
begin, but now it's become a way. And I hear a lot of men talking about it. So if you would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so semen retention is not about never ejaculating again. It's just about spacing it out and letting your nervous system rebuild. And then when you choose to masturbate, you do it with some level of intention, with when and how and why you're doing it, and also with whom you're releasing with if you have a partner. And so when you treat sexuality as sacred and not just a McDonald's drive-through, which is my way of saying Pornhub is that, it's like, okay, if we're going to bring some level of prayer to this, how would I do it? So one of the mythopoetic maps that I teach is a simple one, which is if it were the last time you were going to masturbate and you were going to die tomorrow and you wanted to do it with intention, how would you go about that process? And what would that look like? What would be the differences between how you're doing it now and if you were to tune in? And that's quite an exploration. And for 2 years and 9 months, I was in celibacy, chosen celibacy, where I was developing that practice for myself. And where that led me was following the cyclical nature of the moon and being on a moon cycle. And I had never even read about this or heard about it, but it just sort of led me into this place of releasing once a month. And when it came to that day, I would clear out my entire schedule. So I wouldn't work. It was kind of like a Sabbath, no matter what day of the week it was. And I would go to the ocean. I would sit. I would, sometimes I would go to the float tank or do yoga or massage or just, slackline journal. And then when I got to that experience that evening, whether it was in my home, in the privacy of my home, or under the moon, I would actually build a sacred portal whereby which my mindful masturbation practice was an actual prayer. And that was how I actually moved out of using pornography or thinking my way to orgasm, but was by locking with the moon and just holding the moon and bringing the moon's energy in and through the body and breathing with it as if it is a living being, because I believe that it is, and having discourse with the moon. And that process was helpful because what I learned about myself is that I was thinking my way to orgasm my whole life. And now I was finally feeling my way to orgasm. And when you make that jump, then there's no need to rush it. And there's no need for secrecy, silence, and shame, because there's nothing shameful about connecting your sexuality uh, back into the, into the ecology of the universe. For thousands of years, people likely made love under the moon, and they did their business in nature. And now we're with our phone and secrecy, silence, and shame underneath the covers, being as quiet as possible. And so I think there's a degree of rewilding and a degree of, we speak about ritual. There's a degree of self-initiation that can happen if you choose to reclimatize your sexuality out of technology and back into, eros and the ecology. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It becomes an animate relationality at that point. Some of the things that I'm working on are what we're calling the elding path, or consciously moving towards elderhood. And we've been talking a lot about this, about how like the desire is still strong in us, like men in our 50s and even men in their 60s and 70s still to have this strong desire. And, can be a lot of grief around not being in the game anymore, so to speak, right? In the pursuit, in the wooing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is what we do. We redirect the wooing, the art of wooing, towards the ecology, towards the natural world, so that the spirit of place can begin to assist in the
Mm.
work that we're doing in that type of relationality. And it would make sense to go with the full moon when the waters rise and everything, the mana start to bubble up. Yeah, that's
It,
beautiful.
it was an interesting thing, because as I started to research it a bit, I saw that there are some pagan, I come from Ireland and Scotland, that part of the world. And as I was looking, there's some mythology in and around full moons as when they would do their release. And so maybe somewhere deep inside of me, it's all coming through, who knows, but it was kind of encouraging for me to read about that after it had already happened to me.
Sure.
So,
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure many a fist of semen was thrown on a potato field to make sure it made its made good fruit.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm really glad too that you talked about not about never
Mm-hmm.
ejaculating again, because at what point does retention become repression and suppression? And then again, there's just that potential to be in that shame loop, which I have seen as well. It almost becomes like a just another expression of a kind of macho, misguided control aspect. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate that you touched on that. So over the past 5 years, men's work, right? It's really come flying to the fore. Really, I guess it's really almost a full 7-year cycle where this conversation really started to churn again. There was this pop psychology movement, this pop psycho spiritual movement. I call it the second new age, um, coming through. A lot of information, a lot of modalities, a lot of ideas around what men's work should be or is. What, in your experience, what do you feel is the primary need of men coming together again to explore the emotional realm?
The first question I ask men when I have a connection call is did you have any sound elder guidance or initiation as you were coming into manhood? And 99% of the men say no. The second question I ask is, what was that like for you, like within sexuality? And, from there, the conversation obviously bridges into pornography, which is usually the way in which we learned about our bodies because we didn't really have guidance. And from there, what I ask is, okay, well, when was the first time you saw it? And most men, it's somewhere in the 9 to 12 range. And the next question I ask, for you, your generation's a little bit different than mine. I'm 40, are you
51.
51? So you grew up in sort of the Playboy penthouse era, I would assume, more
Yep,
or
the
less.
analog.
Analog, yeah. And
Mhm.
so did I. My first pornography was Playboy, but soon thereafter, the internet popped and boom, there I was in the high speed world. And so what I see is some men spent a whole decade masturbating to pornography before they had a real human connection. There's men that I work with that still haven't actually had a real connection. And so, what I'm so aware of when you ask that question is I think on some level, individually, collectively, maybe in our bones and our DNA, maybe even at a soul level, I think we come in expecting to have some form of initiation into manhood. And we don't get that. And instead, we get hypersexualization and capitalism and new age movements or just straight religion. And I think we're literally dying for that type of experience. And so as men's work popped, we flooded towards it, and it was uninitiated men initiating, men. Uninitiated men initiating men is really what I saw. And I was the victim of that, right? 10 years ago is when I get into men's work. My first container, I was the victim of a man trying to effectively father imprint on me because he was trying to extract from me more money to go to the next level, right? Because when you look at culty cults or you look at men's work, oftentimes you'll see weaponized ecstasis and catharsis. So you either get somebody really high or you get them really low and they're grieving. And then, hey, there's this next thing that you can do, and it's this much. And that doesn't give a lot of time for, well, what the hell just happened to me? What's this integration look like? We got to go to the next level. And so when you mix the need and the desire to be of service with uninitiated men mixed with capitalism, you get these messy containers that have evolved as they have. And one of the things that I see from the outside looking in is a lot of commercialized trauma release and commercialized big catharsis, where men are in these big states, but there's a camera there, and then that's the way that it's marketed in order to get the next group in. And now men are competing with who can be the best fighter or the strongest griever, and that eliminates and alienates a lot of men that are not attracted to that type of violent and or aggressive ways of being, who are more soft or gentle. So that's where my mind goes. And I would love to hear your answer to that same exact question, because here we are and we're kind of looking at it critically, but also like because we've been in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit it dead on. Men are dying to connect and be initiated. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I really realize that capitalism and brotherhood do not belong on the same field, and that anywhere a pyramid is overly representative, you need to look at the power structures very clearly in the direction of currency and energy. And I've never used the term weaponized catharsis, but I can see it. I can see it, and I think what was learned, particularly, I know I learned, and guys like Bear, is that you need broad integration. If you are going to be bringing a ceremony of catharsis forward, then I found that I am now responsible, and I didn't always see that around me, and it was painful for me to witness. And I've also seen a lot of what you were talking about too, that are to initiate and to imprint from a fatherly place that is shadowing because it's needing to be recognized as a father. Elders aren't looking to be anyone's counselor. Most of the time they'll sit in the corner laughing at you instead. But is there a way? I still believe there is, and that's why I've moved towards what I'm doing. I'm trying to basically make events in my life not a primary breadwinner, basically, that the event is a portal and I just want to break even, more or less. But it's to see who will come in, have the commitment to community and brotherhood and the responsibilities of brotherhood, because it can, I can see there's definitely a weaponization of adrenaline and dopamine at men's events, right? Get them while they're hot. And we've seen it over and over from, Tony Robbins to whoever it is. And it's not that the lives don't change through that.
Mm-hmm.
But if we begin to make that an orthodoxy, if we begin to make it the way,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have problems,
Yeah.
especially if there isn't. I always said, like with the Sacred Sons, I'm like, we need a council of grandmothers.
Mm-hmm.
We need a council of grandmothers. We need someone who is keeping us in check,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it didn't happen.
I'm glad that you were pushing for that, and I saw the same need. Bear, you had him on. I listened to your guys' podcast, and Travis and myself, and so when we formed the Rainmaker Project, which is the name of our men's leadership intensive that we do it yearly right now. Hopefully more later, but we knew that we needed to have an elder council, and so we had created a situation where we asked 4 men and 2 women if they would hold space for us to be able to bring challenges and bring things to. And these are people that have been teachers to us, and also who have reached eldership and elderhood in their own rights, in their own lives, in their own careers. And so having someone to go to is essential. I think that grandiosity grows when there's no accountability or mirrors to actually kind of say, hey, this is the direction, and you guys are probably needing to steer left here. So thank you for pushing that. And I can see why you've stepped out of that, because it makes sense that it sounds like they weren't willing or ready or able or whatever their reason was to take that advice. So,
Yeah, and I always like to follow that up with a note of gratitude. I think that movements like the Sacred Sons fired a shot that was heard around the world that needed to be loud, um, and it also needed to fail in the ways and to also grow and continue, which they do, and I wish them the best in that, and to have a maturation within whatever they're doing. I think one of the other dangers of doing things like leadership trainings is that it brings an identity with it that is tied again to capitalism, an identity that this is what I do. So much of the time, that question of, oh, what do you do, when men are asked that, is basically, how do you make money? Right. And so if you have this deep seated desire to be in service, which I believe all men have, they want to be protectors, they want to be providers, they want to be space holders and ritual enactors, to live ceremonial lives. And we live in a society where that identity gets so confounded and distorted when it becomes a breadwinner, because traditionally that's not how it was done. Like back in the day, someone like you or me might walk into a village and we would just be given gifts. We would never ask for anything. Right. But we have this totally different situation. So
yeah, it
please.
reminds me of Martin Prechtel. Are you familiar with
Oh, yeah,
Martin?
absolutely.
Yeah, he has this cool little story about the and this is down in Mayan territory. I can't remember if it's Guatemala or I'm not sure. But anyways, when people die, they bring in the grief elders, the shamans who are there. They're the wailers to actually help the family to grieve properly. They're not paid in money. They're paid in food and in garments, and they're just praised, but they hold a different space in the community. They don't even handle money. So when you think about these people that usher people through the portal, and they're death doulas, it's not a career that pays you money. So when I think about men's work, I mean, it's you almost can't see men's work without capitalism flowing through it, and so it's just kind of a very different, just a different way of being. As you said, these things can. There's a pyramid, then they grow quickly potentially. So
Yeah. Yeah, it
yeah,
does focus the power in a
mm,
certain way. And at the same rate, like, to put on these events, it takes capital, right?
does.
For us to be trained and to take the nourishment that we need, it takes capital. So I think that this is a really important part of the conversation as we move forward in how we support each other in more educational um, containers, and start to get away from identity of healing people and becoming more deeply embedded in as educators,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah. I love that. And I would say if money could not be involved at all, the work would go so much deeper. That's just a personal opinion. And I will also say that people show up to the things that they put money into. And so that's another aspect to it, which is to motivate oneself to actually take action. It's you take things more seriously when you invest in yourself. And it's I wish that wasn't the way it is, but we live in that society where you can't extract yourself from the capitalistic machine. So it's
And
tricky.
you're absolutely right. I've given probably too much work away in my career, you know, and it was rarely met with vigor, I
Yeah.
have to say. Yeah, people need to make that investment in themselves. Yeah, so you know, you and Bear and your other brothers have delved into a realm that I haven't, which I believe takes courage and a little bit of trickster blood in your running through you, which is bringing psychedelics into the men's spaces. Talk about how that evolved for you. What was the initial inspiration to do so, and
Yeah.
how's it going?
So I had done men's work. I had done individual therapy. I'd done medicine work. I'd done shamanic work. I'd done leadership trainings with the Flow Genome Project. Jamie Wheel, he's a mentor of mine. And I saw many different aspects of how to hold space. And yet I hadn't seen anybody really bringing them together into something that I would really love to show up for and that I would want to go through myself. And so I was like thinking to myself, okay, well, what would that look like to kind of blend some of these modalities instead of keeping them so separate? And I was in a therapy session. My therapist, I had a session with her today. She's from an ayahuasca family, but she's also a PhD, psychotherapist. So she's kind of living from both worlds. She's also on the Rainmaker Elder Council. And we were having a session, and sometimes I'll just let her kind of channel and just receive her clear transmission without me giving her any information. And sometimes we'll spend like 20 minutes doing that before we start to do the therapy. And this particular session, she just closed her eyes and she was just kind of moving her hands around. And she's like, wow, I just see you leading a group of men doing psychedelic work, because we'd been talking about psychedelics. And so it was a really interesting thing because it didn't necessarily come from me through me as, oh, I want to do this thing. It was actually her seeing it before I even saw it. And then as she was conveying it to me, I was like, yeah, Bear and Travis, oh my gosh. And a decentralized leadership instead of hierarchical, let's decentralize it. And then let's let the participants lead things as well. And so I just jumped out of my bed after the session, because I like laid down for the session. It was kind of just listening to her on my headphones. And I just sent out an email to those guys. And there was another guy who was a part of it too, Alan, in the beginning. And he's kind of stepped out, and we're having another man step in as an apprentice. But they were all just like, fuck yes, fuck yes, fuck yes. And I was like, all right, like, let's do this thing. And so now we've done it 3 times, and 3.5 times, because we did one out in Austin too that was just about sexuality. So we've done it 3.5 times over the course of 3 years. And it's working. And it's very unique take on men's work, because it's part ceremony, it's part, emotional relating, it's part sexuality, which often gets left out. It's body work. Um, it's the blending of all religious ideas and spiritual ideas. Like, all spiritual paths are welcome. And we have conversations about that. And men come from different walks of lives. We have fathers and sons that show up. And then it's also fun. We bring in Travis. He plays music, and so he'll DJ. And so we get sort of this unique experience where we're kind of blending a lot of different modalities into one. And we turn it into a leadership training. So it's more of a experience. So we have calls before, we have the event, and then we have calls after. So instead of just coming in and leaving, it creates a really tight container where men form and forge like, friendships that last, hopefully indefinitely. And then in addition to that, there are some men that have been all 3 years and now they're stepping into more deeper leadership positions inside of those events, which is giving them space to hone their own craft and whatever they're interested in, which feels really good. So yeah, so that's basically how it works for the most part, high level.
So you feel that the psychedelics help to bring down some of the veil, bring down, scrape away the layers of avoidance, the masks.
Yep. So in traditional psychedelic spaces, whether it's mushrooms, ayahuasca, or San Pedro, you have your spot and you stay in your spot. You don't touch anybody, and you are, there's a containment of your energy and your interaction with other men or other people in the space. We do it a little bit differently. We have a playlist, and when we take the medicine, it's very prayerful and ceremonial. Plus we do parts work therapy as well to make sure we have permission to do the work. But then when the music hits and we begin the ceremony, we kind of call it, or we do call it, chaos magic. And the reason why we call it chaos magic is because there is a degree of chaos that is created in those spaces where people are getting up and getting onto massage tables, people are dancing, people are purging, people are having meltdowns. But there's this cohesion where we're all kind of taking ourselves and each other through some sort of a portal. And it's hard to describe what that portal is unless you've gone through it, but it is an individual and often collective ego death process is the way that I would describe it.
Yeah, it's a Wild West frontier, really.
It is, and it's not for everyone. We'll just say that.
Yeah, you mentioned Jamie Wheel, and I actually um, spent a bunch of time in what's just south of Oceanside there, where they were all living for a minute.
Carlsbad,
Carlsbad, and then the rich town, the richest
in
town,
Encinitas.
Encinitas. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah.
got to hang out with Jamie a little bit there, and I struggle with the biohacking movement. I'll be perfectly honest. I think that it can steer in towards the dominant, controlling masculine pretty easily without realizing that this ecosystem that we wear, that our soul is given as a vessel, is ultimately born of the feminine. How do you feel about that relationship between biohacking the body and the relational aspects that psychedelia are asking of us?
Mm-hmm. When you say biohacking, do you mean what's specifically a part of biohacking? Because it's a broad.
Reducing the body to hormones, chemical compounds, and vitamins, and that you're going to control every aspect of those and control every aspect of your routine. And all the reasons that are given are materialistic in nature and that they relate to the running of a physical system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. Well, I'll say that uh, there's two threads here. One is Jamie and his work, and then there's also the biohacking community and crew. And I would just say that it's really broy in the biohacking space, just in general, super broy, and to a point where you feel kind of cringy around those types of people. At least I do. My personal experiences. And I will also say that there are aspects of detox that are what would be considered biohacking that have been really essential for my own body and my own journey because of how sick I was inside. And so I can respect some of the technologies and some of the things that are out there, but the actual culture is kind of just turn my nose up at it, to be frankly, especially like Dave Asprey. I can't even fucking follow that guy anymore. It's just like disgusting. But Jamie is a mentor at the Flow Genome Project. Like understanding flow states, individual flow states, and group flow has been really helpful for me. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that has been things that I brought through into the work that we do so that we can get into flow and stay into flow. And that feels amazing because there's a magic that he, has wielded, and he's takes a scientific approach, but it actually works. It feels good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Flow states. Yeah, I'm curious about where he's moved in his work. You know, for me, like measuring up against Navy SEALs is like not a good idea for myself, you know. Um, and but still there is this need to push, to have vigor, to have an intensity in life in order to have those deeper states of ease.
Hmm.
Um, what are you doing these days to create those polarities of intensity and ease?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the ease. I'm a big float tank guy, and you could consider that biohacking, but to me, it's meditation.
Yeah, to me it's
And
elemental because it's water and dark. Like, you
yeah,
know,
it's so great. And
it is a
my
technology, but again, it's still like staying like
uh,
outside an
it,
elemental.
it is, and I I'm one for a little microdose and going into the float tank and sorting out through all of the layers and all of the things that are bombarding me in my brain. It's like one person will come in or a task will come in, I'll address it, let it go. Next one comes in, next person. And then finally I'll get to a place where there's no thought. And so it's a really beautiful way to get into a space where the mind gets to be empty and the body gets to truly relax. And I do a lot of stretching in there, a lot of yin, just a lot of movement and cracking of my back. And it feels so, I feel so good afterwards. So that's one thing that I do. As far as more intensity, um, I, I wake up and I swing a mace. I've got rings, I've got pull ups. I like to shadow box. And I go down to the beach sometimes and bury my feet in the sand, and I'll do a lot of qigong. I'll do it at night is what I prefer, and so I do kind of a lot of just self work just to keep the body not necessarily growing in muscle, but just maintaining a strong physique. I like a lot of cold and hot; those types of things are amazing. But brotherhood and doing hard stuff is fun, but not overdoing it.
Yeah, that's what I think one of the more wonderful things that have come forward, but is the number of men who have become more physical over the past 5, 7 years, really engaging, you know, their bodies. And you talk a lot about somatics, and somatics is another word that has really come to the fore. How do you like to define that to the layman when you're coming to someone who might not somatic? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I think of somatic, I can't not think of parts work. So I do what's called soma psychedelic bioelectric body work. So I work with a TENS unit. Have you ever used a TENS unit? They're those little electrodes you put on your muscle and it goes kind of shocks your muscle. Have you seen those?
I think I had one when I had a knee surgery with the physical therapy, maybe.
Yeah. So I work with one of those machines where two paddles go onto the client on the table, the other paddles go onto the ground. When I put my foot on the paddles, the electricity literally travels through my whole body. And as I touch the client, there's an electrical charge that's created. So it's kind of like an avatar link up where you're linking up with their body and their soma and their psyche and also even the soul. And what I've learned in the process of doing this is as you're moving, and I do my best to move at the pace of like touching a infant child. So I'm going very slow. But as I move through someone's, nervous system, if I get to something and there's a contraction or the nervous system shuts down or there's an ow or there's a some sort of hesitation, I'll just ask the person, what's here for you? As you bring your awareness into your knee, what do you notice? What does it want to tell you or show you? And from that place, there's often a lot of rich information. Oh, when I was 10 and I crashed my bike and my dad picked me back up and put me on and set me down the hill and I was bleeding everywhere. It's like, okay, like, is there something that you'd like to, share about that beyond just that experience? Oh, well, that was not okay. And I was so scared or whatever it might be, right? So when I think of parts, a lot of people think that it's just in the mind, but parts are actually in the tissues. And so these memories live in the body. And as you move through the body slowly, they often communicate to the person who's being touched. And through attunement, we can begin to not release trauma, because I don't look at it that way, but we can begin to integrate trauma. We can begin to integrate some of these things that have happened in the tissues that are still the stories that are still stored in the tissues by just bringing a little bit of, um, just expression. And sometimes there's no story. Sometimes it's just tears, or sometimes there needs to be just an emotional release or sort of shake or some sweats. But this is so critical for a person inhabiting their full body, because often parts of us, and this is my perspective, I'm not saying this as a, as a sort of, this isn't some spiritual woo woo thing, although it might seem woo woo, but parts of our soul, if we have physical injuries or sexual injuries, can get dislodged, and they live even outside of us, outside of our field. And sometimes they can be kind of lost in time. And so when we begin to bring some awareness and some unshaming to that, or some presence to that, then some of these parts can come back in and integrate. So
Mhm.
that's how I would look at it.
Mhm. Beautiful.
And you?
Yeah. The journey of bodies. I often I often say that it is looking for the whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. And in order to do that, we need to travel the entirety of the terrain and get to
Mm-hmm.
know the terrain and all that dwells there. So similar, you know. I do a lot of mapping of the myofascial network, which is a picture of the etheric body, or the subtle energetic rivers that form the body from outside, and a place where a great deal of residue piles up, and a place where water and electricity travel. So it's similar to what you're talking about. The ability to get electricity and water to cooperate and move has a great cleansing effect for the soul,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the way that it inhabits the astral aspects of self and the soft tissue. So yeah, somatics is the life is movement, brother. It's like even the mountains still rising and falling. And so for me, it's like if we want to think in new ways, if we want to feel in new ways, then we are greatly aided by moving in new ways and exploring the instrument of movement, the vessel of motion in new ways. So that's it's a endless exploration of the cosmos, really, you know, and the human as cosmos and terrain. You know, a lot of time I try and get people to. It's like you can look at a beautiful mountain and say how amazing it is. Can you regard yourself as the land? Can you turn that same attention that you give to the broad expanses within, and then can we learn to express that and refine it through motion? Um,
Mm-hmm.
my background is in a discipline called spatial dynamics, where we actually look at the more metaphysical quantum aspects of self that are outside the physicality. um, so often it's important to come in, but there's such thing as too much in there. It becomes a density of self. In fact, most autoimmune disorders are from a collapsed astral and etheric body that's within the body,
Mm-hmm.
something unrecognizable that's energetically meant to expand. Almost all autoimmune disorders have a contractive gesture that go along. So much of me for somatics is reinvigorating the rhythm between contraction and expansion, which
Mm-hmm.
is how life expresses itself, from seed to cotyledon to stem to leaf. You know, the body itself is meant to be expansive. People are like, I want to feel my body. It's great. We want to feel our body, for good food and good lovemaking and, these things. But we actually want to counter that with feeling with the body. And that's the kind of the scale that I look at my awareness along. If my ability to tune is like, how much of my awareness is of my body and how much of it is with my body, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I know that things change if I begin to observe people with my collarbones. It changes the dynamic in the room, because
Mm-hmm.
this is the mind body, one word, no slash, no dash.
Mm-hmm.
This is the mind, this whole vessel. So how do we wake that up, shake that up, and bring about new levels of attunement?
You said something about the land and body being one, and it made me realize, or made me think about the Kumeyaay. I live in San Diego, and so the Kumeyaay were the native people that lived here before, I think, until like 1900-ish. But when you look at that language, they didn't have a different word for land and body. It was literally the same word. And so you can see how confusing that would be when Western people were like, "Hey, we want to buy your land," and they're like, "We're not for sale." Like, what the fuck are you talking about, right? And so what I'm hearing is there's a non-duality in that recognition and that awareness of, you know, this and that, and how I treat this is how I treat that, and how I treat that is how I treat this, and how I treat you is how I treat myself, and how I treat my penis is how I treat the world. It's like, oh shit, if we really take into that awareness, then we can begin to see how self-abuse turns into the abuse of ecology, and the abuse of ecology is self-abuse. And we often are not aware of that as we're moving through these, you know, I guess you could call them incarnations, or maybe just these time periods. So,
Yeah, you could definitely call them both those things. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's absolutely the awareness I'm trying to build, even, within the culture of division right now. Like people want to, about Israel, they're like, they want to argue with me about it. I say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Every hand is bloody on this planet for what's going on in Israel right now. So if I dip into hatred of anything, that's not going to work. That's not going to move something. That doesn't mean that I don't have my opinions and my own historical knowledge of the situation, but that now at this point, at the age I'm at, and having been in activism, those kind of things, it's like, okay, actually I need to refine thought, refine feeling, and teach that as well, in order for peace everlasting to descend on this planet, so to speak, which is what I'm going for. that's
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm about.
Yeah, it's that awareness of the infinite game players in the next 7 generations, because when we're dead and gone, the rites of passage and the culture that we instill now will be what passes. And so it's sort of that awareness that a lot of people's perspective, for whether it's business or even men's work, it's about me, mine, and my ego, my money, my house, my family. And I think that you and I are speaking the same language on some level by what you just shared there, which is peace on earth. Well, if I leave this place shitty, then my children and children's children and children's children's children aren't going to have peace on earth. And so we have to do the work now for them. And that's super important to understand. And I think I would love to hear your perspective on that, but like also I feel like you just said that in your own way.
Yeah, I think it's all part of placing responsibility before identity in men's work and what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing, and what are the broader responsibilities, what are the lasting imprints, what are the shouts that will echo
Yeah.
and continue to come back and build upon themselves. We live in a wonderful time and a terrifying time, in that we can recognize that there are no cultures of wisdom that give us identity, and through place in the cosmos and on the earth. And we have this opportunity. We call it the orphan way, a way to go out and seek not what was found, but what was sought. And what are the awarenesses? What were the attunements that were required in the quiet, unseen hours in order for culture to move through, that that gave these initiations that are now looking to be reborn. We get the breadcrumbs, we get the lodge, we get the vision quests and the mushroom work and the little things. How do we turn that into loaves? How do we commit on that next level of, I'm going to continue to do this, continue to learn, continue to be willing to make mistakes, continue to be willing to come into confrontation with what's come forward, in order to set what you're talking to, which is a foundation, a cultural foundation of emotional and spiritual intelligence, you know.
Hmm. Wow. That felt good to hear.
Yeah.
That hit me.
Yeah, it's big work, brother. It's big work, and it requires such a diverse amount of uniqueness. And the one thing, there's the new non-duality aspect, but also this sovereignty, this uniqueness, special, not special, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unique is very important,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's important that we don't end up in echo chambers with of our own creation. It's important that the authenticity that wants to come forward is nourished amongst each other, right? So that each piece, because I think a lot of men are coming out of this place of, I need to hold it all, right? I'm holding it down, right? Really, I want to just like, I want to throw the tarp off so that it just explodes in this emergent way, from me and those who are committed through, discipline and
Mm.
service and prayerful life to continue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to have something to hand off, right? So that there's young men in our circles always like asking me to build these initiations for them and stuff. It's like, whoa, 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 what do you think I'm doing? It's just
Mm.
not at the pace of what
Mm-hmm.
society is telling you it needs to be. you know I know that if I'm doing my job right, that by the time you hit 42, you're golden. You are ready to lead, right? But so much of what we're talking about here in New Elder Wisdom is that certificates don't make you wise. That experience and, rising, falling, victories, failures, this is what hones and brings about wisdom. And that we need to let men know that you are 28 years old. You have no place going into the circle and leading a 50-year-old man who has 4 kids into the shadows. And that might seem harsh, but I honestly believe that to be the case. I really don't think anyone under the age of 35 should really be facilitating in shadow work, to be perfectly honest, unless they are truly an exceptional uh, or a lineaged person.
Mm-hmm.
But you spoke to it, right? An uninitiated men initiating men,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to a certain degree, it's like, well, we have to, like, there's no one
Sure.
around, so
Sure.
there's gonna be pain, and it's gonna be choppy at first. But now, right, we're as we're moving towards a decade of this increased vigor. I know the Men's Kind Project's been doing it all along, but to me they became almost like a secret society, and here we are. Like, okay, we're doing it, and actually some mistakes are being made, and we're learning, and this is golden, and you really want to come for this because it fills us up. Ultimately what we should be doing, what I do when I show up at an event, it's basically, this is how I live my life, brothers.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we're doing because this is what I do, and you agreed to follow what I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna do these things. Now it's Adam Bear's turn, because this is how he lives his life.
Sure.
Um, so it just becomes an extension. The identity is just born through that because it's an
Mm-hmm.
authentic expression of experience and wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
rather than a certificate or a level earned in a leadership program.
Yeah. 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 I love that. The reason I feel that I can lead men that are older than me is because often men that are older than me are still struggling with the things that I have moved beyond, specifically the pornography and the sex addiction. So I have clients that are in their 70s,
Right,
men
but
that
you're
have
40. It's different.
yeah, but I wasn't yes. So I agree with you that men
For me, it's
underneath
that
35,
it's the
yeah.
21 to 28 thing,
Yes. Yes.
particularly.
So I'm in full agreement with you around that. And I will also say that on the edge of my like 35th year, I was starting to coach people in this way, not into an initiation, but just working with men that hadn't fully seen that stuff. And so what I'm calling awareness to is like there need not be an uninitiated man initiating any man at any age for that matter. And I think that we're trying to figure it out. Like what does an initiation look like coming from an orphan culture, like where there is no initiation? What does that look like? And I still am trying to figure that out within sexuality, right? Because it's like, okay, if the fathers take their teenage sons into the jungle, the desert, or the forest for an initiation, what does that look like, especially around sexuality? And that's what I've been focused on. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's, we bring them in and then we say, okay, go do your solo. And while you're out there, if you want to attune to your sexual energy and run some, go for it. Find your orgasm out by the trees alone versus, in the, in the phone. And so what I'm just calling awareness to is it's really confusing to set up an initiatory experience in a culture where we didn't get initiated, and then now we're trying to figure it out. And so I would love your thoughts and your help on that, because I'm wondering what that looks like to work with the youth in that particular topic in that particular way. So
Yeah, so again, I always try and, find a way for people to be of service. Like the last event we did, there were 17 of us, and we did 2 hours of work at the community where we're at, and the owners are like, holy shit, you just did a week's worth of work in
mm-hmm.
2 hours, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that satisfies that. Just to clarify my position, something like in the modern where, it's expected that there's a catharsis, right? And then you have a young man who's now in the hot seat of trying to bring about catharsis in a realm that he has not experienced, right? It's one thing to be in counsel and to have a specific agreed upon subject, but to just go diving in to the broad world of the shadow with a need, there's an extracted need to get them there, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I remember I was in Australia, and I ended up doing like 5 complete processes in just under 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And my team's looking at it, they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, just think, if you think back, what was I mostly doing that whole time? And I think they're like, oh, you weren't doing anything. I was merely allowing the focus of the man in the middle to be upon himself.
Mm-hmm.
And they begin to lead themselves. And that's the type of attunement I like to see with leadership, is to
Mm-hmm.
bring a man to a point where he begins to lead himself, and then we can begin. It's less extractive that way, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll come, their body will guide what they're ready for, the layers that are ready to be dealt with. And then some guys just do needs to be straight up punched in the face in order to cry, So it's like, we are learning, but the help comes from the archetype of the orphan. We get a lot of king, warrior, magician, lover, and the big four, it's important stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The one who will find their way back to the art of belonging and the culture that comes in the cooperative spirit of the land is the orphan. To get off the throne and to
Mm-hmm.
lay down and beseech and listen, like you spoke uh, to take in by oneself, unseen, unheralded, bring gifts, woo, bring the spirit of wooing to that desire for a collaborative culture of animacy, of relationship with land and spirit, with the human being right there in the middle. So, for me, that's in the, what's called the Hawthorne way now, or the way that we walk together at Hawthorne Clan, is the emphasis is on the orphan, for those to go and seek fostering
Mm-hmm.
as a way of wooing good questions rather than telling the creator who and what they are.
Mm.
But to go in with this blankness, I often have men create altars of unknowing or altars of not knowing.
Mm.
Go worship your not knowing, because there's a space. What are the relationships that are going to fill that? What are the experiences that can culminate into a discipline of relationality
Mm-hmm.
with the cosmos, ultimately? And we start right outside the front door. Those are the trees that have been watching you every day come and go in all your moods. We don't have to go all the way to Peru, bro. Just leave some chocolate and tobacco right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Dancing with the spirits and the animate. It's beautiful that you're weaving men's work and prayer and spirit into what you do. for me, you and I share a very close friend, which is Bear. And the way that you guys had your podcast and the way that you guys think and speak about each other and the way that I have my relationship with Bear and the way that he and I speak and think about each other and the wisdom and the ways in which you've impacted his way of leadership have shown up where I see that on some level, even though you and I have not shared men's workspaces, that there's a frequency of that way of being that he brings that's his medicine, but has probably been through the sharing of spaces with you. And so it's interesting because when I hear certain things, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a new way of being as it relates to doing men's work and being of service and being in relationship with the all, just like you were saying, doing the service project at the land. We did that at our last project and spread wood chips. And it feels so good to actually not just come and extract from a place that you go to run men's work, but to actually give back. I think that was one of the more bonding experiences we had because everybody was out there shoveling, chips and, and just the conversations were flowing, So I just like want to name that there's a new intelligence that's forming in relationship to these ways of being in men's work that feels a lot more aligned and out of that sort of let's wear the flag kind of men's work. So yeah,
It's exciting. For me, it's been a very expansive process to lean deep into the orphan, to and not just the grief aspect, and the grief aspect is important, but also this great space within that is giving out the invitation to bring me information that is useful to human beings. Like for men that don't know how to pray, I say, hey, that's first of all, that's the wonderful first prayer where you just said, I don't know how to pray. Okay, that's a great one. The second one is, and the only one you ever need is, please prepare me for the ways that I will be needed to be in service to this age. Even like with the events, it's like, if you never go into a sweat lodge again, if you never do functional movement again, if you never dive deep into the shadow again, but you caught a bug because you spread wood chips amongst brothers and it felt really good to get back, that's enough for me. Like, carry that one forward and we'll get into a better place. So it's and that's been a big lesson for me too, is like, not everything is for everybody, not everyone is ready to take all the steps, but we can support and nourish people where they're at if we're willing to go there, take a step back, see if they come forward. Right? Collective sovereignty, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion. Because what's new we call it the being in the now, the new old way, is so much about retaining sovereignty of individuality while cultivating the awareness of the indigenous peoples that was a collective awareness.
mm-hmm.
Right? A collective shamanism, a
Mm-hmm.
collective dream. But with the hollow bone, the old ancestor work, oftentimes the identity, the individuality, the sovereignty is thrown off.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you have the skill to get back, right?
Yep.
Not everyone made it back. We have all these schizophrenics in that position. But can we retain the clarity and orientation of sovereignty, individuality, while expanding out into a collective awareness that is in service to the age? That is, for me, the challenge of the education that I want to bring forward and be in collaboration with as men move forward into what the next steps are, right? Because how many kings do you need in the fucking room, man? Right.
Well, everybody wants to be, hey, I'm good. I'm ready. It's like, okay.
Respect. Yeah. You're the king of your kingdom. Right. That's
Yeah.
good. But the
Yeah.
king, the true sovereign, I got a real sense of this with Wachuma, the grandfather of medicine, is how the true patriarch takes a joy in seeing the sovereignty of those he is responsible for, and that his responsibility has provided a freedom a certain level of comfort for those who he cares for to expand beyond where he can go himself.
Mm.
And so that aspect of patrimony, of
Mm-hmm.
fathering, um, comes from a peripheral view, not of control, but of expansive view from
Mm.
the throne.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
how's that land with you?
It lands with me. I love considering in that way when I think about the king archetype. If I were in a position of, you know, like what it comes up for me is like if I was in an actual situation where I was the king, I'd be the one with the, the hood over my head, putting on a mustache and going down into the actual city and listening to what actually people are saying and what they're needing and what's actually going on. And then I would make decisions based upon what actually is not being passed all the way to the top because of the communication or the things that I can't tell. And so it's just like, I don't look at ruling from a place of being the wheel or the hub. I look at being one of the spokes. And if I don't make myself as human as those that I'm ruling, then there's no kingdom. There's no bounty. There's no flourishing. And your job as the king is to be the protector. And it's just, I don't know. To me, I don't understand the tyrant. I don't understand the necessity for extraction. And I also see the necessity that, there are other people that have ill intent. And so don't be a weakling king either. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I often think about, a lot of what I've seen come out of the Mankind Project in terms of processes and the way that the warrior remains militarized to a certain
Mm-hmm.
degree,
Yep.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where to me, the warrior, he mostly uses his sword to plow the land. He's really a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
He just loves to train so much that when it's time, he's ready. But when it's regimented, um, there's just a danger of manipulation and
Mm-hmm.
of overriding free will.
Mm.
And to me, especially in this age of what is about to happen and what's happening, like we need to nourish free will to the ninth degree in the spaces that we hold.
Mm-hmm.
And that's there's permission and agreements and those things, but there's like this next level that we are continuing to learn about, of how we can support this type of free will
Mm-hmm.
that is ultimately governed by intuition, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Discernment first for the young men, intuition for those who are ready to come into their feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the way that those two work is the union that I'm beginning to, teach, is the masculinity of discernment and the feminine aspects of intuition, and how we can develop those as men. Um, so much of what I see in the world with gender identity, particularly, is just the materialization of a spiritual impulse when I feel like I'm doing the best work I am, particularly in shadow spaces, I'm a grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Like my
It's,
space is this womb space. It's
yeah.
this warmth of water,
Mm.
and the support I'm able to offer, is very feminine, I believe, even though I'm still acting in a masculine way,
Yeah.
and
You sharing that and me seeing you there holding space, I have an idea of what that might look like or feel like to be inside of that container, and I look forward to being in a space that you're holding so that I can witness it. But what also comes up when I hear that is, um, I think I get what you're saying in my own way, which is to say that I've had several dreams of being a woman. One of which that I recall very clearly was a very simple dream, but just it opened and I was a brown skinned woman with big floppy boobs. I had lots of babies and I was literally birthing a baby boy like out of my body and bringing it up to my breast. And so when I think about queer people, when I think about two spirit people, when I think about people that are in that gender fluid place or they're not quite sure what's happening, I have my own place for it because I see my particular perspective is at a soul level, we're neither nor gender, and we're both and genders. So we're not male or female, but we're both male and female, and we're coming through this evolutionary process of coming into bodies that sometimes don't align with what we wanted or expected or what we prefer or whatever it might be, and sometimes we do. So my sense is that the more we can inhabit the feminine within and accept our masculine form as a man in this one, incarnation, the more integrated we can become with who we're holding space for, and the more our true soul can speak through, instead of all these other parts of our psyche that are getting in the way and causing, dissonance or noise in the field. So when I think about you as a grandmother, that's I I actually like thinking about you as a grandmother, like an old grandmother, more than just like thinking about you as a 51-year-old man.
Yeah, I think it's important that we learn to, and I think Stephen Jenkinson says it like, masculinity and femininity are not identities, they're skills,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
you know.
I like that.
And I relate to that, in a big way. And also, like I grew up in black neighborhoods, and like grandmother is to be feared as well, like
Oh yeah.
some of the sharpness that men need at times can come down from the same energy, but it's ready to catch you when you fall and not condemn you.
Mm-hmm.
This is a shame. So, that's really what I see. Everything that is being presented in the material world is a shadow of what the spiritual concept is. And if it drives people to weakness, to victim identity, if it drives them to sacrificing themselves, through disfigurement and fundamental hormonal changes of self, it becomes a materialism where there's actually something that can be fed, cultivated, and nourished from a spiritual soul realm that
Mm-hmm.
will ultimately give more satisfaction, will give more integration into life, give more of a sense of union of self, and more unique medicine to come forward.
Mm.
So that's a whole other topic, um, um, but
Well, I
we,
know that topic well.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we're coming in on around, oh yeah, about an hour and 45 here. So that's good, man. Normally I try and keep it to an hour just because people's attention spans are short, but we've gotten to a lot. Is there anything you'd like to close with? Any thoughts that are coming through? Questions you want to ask me even
Mm.
before we begin to wrap this up?
You have 2 children, is that correct?
Three. I have
Three?
two sons, 24 and 22, and a 19-year-old daughter.
Okay. When you think about your deathbed and you think about that last sort of crossover, getting close to crossover, what is the prayer for your children as you say, okay guys, it's time? What does that sound like or feel like for you?
Oh, it's funny. I've thought about this before. Never had anyone ask me. Ultimately, I would hope that they had the presence and attunement and had arrived at a place where they're ready for me to go, and they
Mm.
say, "Have a great adventure, Dad. We know you're excited about what's on the other side too, and so feel free to go."
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you're gonna make me all emotional here at the end. Oh no. got me time traveling and shit. And yeah, it's yeah, I'm kind of at a death place, in that I'm seeing that my sons, everybody lives together still,
Mm. Cool.
and we do pretty great, but I'm realizing now that it's okay. It's like, actually, the world's much different. When I was younger, I could go out, be a carpenter's help, get an apartment, pay for my car insurance, and survive. That's
Mm-hmm.
not so much the case anymore in the modern world. And yet they need to begin to cultivate away from being in the protection of this space
Mm,
right now, you know, and I'm not like shoving them out the door, but I'm having to initiate the conversation. And I do understand that the world is much different than when I came up, you know, but that's you with parenting, you come to find out that as soon as you got it figured out, they shift. And so they require an immense amount of emergent um, attention. So, you know, I would hope that at my deathbed that there's this emergent space between
mm,
us,
mm,
that whatever comes forward is purely born of that moment.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you being here, man. This has been a great conversation.
Hmm.
A lot of gifts of knowledge and wisdom coming from you.
Yeah.
People,
Thank you for
Tyson
having me.
Adams. Yeah, man. Let the people know where they can find you. Best way to get at you, and we'll get it also in the credentials when we release.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Just my website's still being finalized, so just look me up on Facebook or Instagram, and just if you want to follow or message, you can reach me there. And yeah, I run a men's group on Monday nights for men that have sexuality challenges. So 5:30 to 7. So if you want to be a part of a men's group that's sexuality focused, that's available
And this is online.
online.
Fantastic. Well, Tyson, thanks for doing what you do, man. It's very important, and I look forward to having you up in the neighborhood, and we're going to get you down in the Orphan Way here, and before too long.
Sounds good.
All right, my brother. Have a beautiful
Right.
afternoon.
You too. Thank you.